Good.
And raise around if you want to, if that's something that you're interested in, or just
Or fall in love.
Or fall in love. Yeah, exactly. People have decided to have children. Real estate is interesting because it's a very tried and true model. Everyone's going to get an Edgeclaw. It's like a fork of openclaw, essentially, called Vasocomputation. Berlin, to me, is kind of funnily like more of a futuristic place. And
so I am here with Timour, very excited to talk about in real life community and frontier tech and all the work he's doing around that intersection. So who is Timour? Timour is a founder, investor, and community builder based between New York and Berlin. He spent the last decade building and advising startups. He worked at Artsy, the largest online art marketplace, co-founded Kama, a health tech app, and built Impact, a large social brand. He's also founded the award-winning experiential agency, etc. On the investing side, he was a partner at Seed Club Ventures, where he focused on early-stage Web3 companies. Earlier in his career, he worked in investment banking at Piper Jaffray and studied at NYU. Today, Timour is the co-founder of Edge City, a global network of pop-up villages bringing together people at the frontiers of tech, science, and society to prototype new ways of living and working together. Edge City grew out of the Zuzalo ecosystem, started by Vitalik Buterin, and has now hosted 7 pop-up villages worldwide with over 11,000 participants. Timour thinks deeply about meaning, culture, and what it takes to build communities where people actually flourish. Timour, welcome.
Thank you so much.
What an amazing background.
It's kind of funny to hear it all read back to me. I haven't kind of thought about it in that way in a while, but yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, before we get started, would love to hear more about your background, where you came from, and maybe your journey into where you are now in Edge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm happy to start kind of at the very beginning. So I was born in a small town in Siberia. It's where I grew up for the first few years of my life. And it's relevant to the work I'm doing now because it was a very kind of a lucky bit of chance that got me out of that and eventually got me to London. My mum got a fellowship when I was quite young to come study in the US. So she left me with my grandparents and I grew up there while she studied in New York. And then a few years later, she got a job in London and we kind of reunited there. And I start with that because I think it's kind of a relevant aspect of, I think a lot about providing these kinds of opportunities or these open doors to people that can then meet it with tenacity and hard work and talent, and be able to, really have inflection points in their lives. So I feel very lucky, very grateful to even be here talking to you, just in general, the life that I live, because I remember what it was like before. So yeah, I grew up kind of very happy in London. I studied mathematics at NYU, so kind of full circle, came to New York as well 20 years later after my mum was there. And I spent about 10 years, like you mentioned, working in tech. And about 3 years ago, I was invited to this event called Zuzalo that Vitalik Buterin kind of conceptualized. And it was kind of the first example of what we now call pop-up villages or pop-up cities. But essentially the concept is an extended period of time. So in that case, it was 2 months, and it was hosted in Montenegro in Europe. And it's a chance for several hundred people to come together, to live together in kind of a town, village-like environment. Generally people from technology, from science, from the cultural sphere. And I was invited actually to run the AI track, which 3 years ago, ChatGPT had just come out. So it's kind of a very different context back then. We had a lot of fun. It was a very meaningful experience for me. I was learning a lot. I was meeting a lot of amazing people. I was in an environment where it was a lot of diverse opinions and ways of thinking, but in a container that allowed for kind of bridging of those opinions, finding, consensus among those people. And I just found it very interesting, very intoxicating. So I essentially joined the team, helped Zuzalo do a second event in Turkey. And then after Zuzalo decentralized and Vitalik wanted to kind of inspire a bigger movement and lots of people to try different things, I started Edge City with Janine Leger, who's my co-founder. She had started Zuzalo with Vitalik, so she was also kind of there from the beginning. And yeah, we've been at it since.
Awesome. Can you talk about the thesis of Edge City and what you
Yeah.
all are trying to do that's different than what exists now?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a few different aspects to it. So first of all, what do we actually do? We organize these month-long pop-up villages for people at the frontiers of tech, science, and culture. We get people to come and actually live together for an extended period. So unlike a conference where you're kind of quickly meeting people, this is a chance to actually not just learn, but actually start building things towards a brighter future. And we talk about wanting to, you know, build these society incubators with a focus on human flourishing. So people come, and we've had dozens of startups form. We've had relationships form. People meet their co-founders, their best friends. We've had a few kids that have been conceived at or because of Edge, which is kind of another KPI that we track. So it's a very kind of dynamic and interesting environment. And the whole idea is basically creating these micro pockets of experimentation that, as the world and as society transitions into what Vitalik calls the chaotic era, as we're entering another period of a lot of very quick change, things are accelerating. I think it's important to have pockets of experimentation, almost like real life laboratories where we can try new things, and not just building startups, but actually things that are societally relevant as well. So new education models, new ways of connecting in community. How do we use frontier technology to actually aid us in being more human? How do we human better, connect with the people around us? How do we educate our children and educate ourselves? Things like that. So that's kind of the idea. We do 2 of these per year. One happens in the US and one's international. The international one travels around. So we did Patagonia last year where, we met, and then we'll be doing India again this year in October. And then the one in the US happens in Northern California in collaboration with the Newtown Project, which is kind of another aspect of what we do, where we like to not just pop up, but also collaborate with longer term projects. So as an example, there's a new town called Esmeralda that we are partnering with and helping to build. It's about 90 minutes north of San Francisco. And we do this event together every year called Edge Esmeralda, that not only does all the exciting stuff that I was just talking about, but is also in service of building this longer term vision of a family friendly, low car, kind of tech friendly town in Northern California.
I would love to double click on the human better and like in real life relationship component. So I think there's so much conversation on the timeline around the crisis of dating, or even like intimately connecting or having like longer term relationships. I think a lot of people are talking about this, and obviously with like birth rates or matchmaking has really been taking off. What are you seeing within the community pop-ups that you're doing around maybe more intimate relationships, whether they're co-founders, like your future spouse, or even like best friend?
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting aspect of modernity that we are, kind of more connected than ever in many ways, but also lonelier than ever. There's like a loneliness epidemic. There's a epidemic of mental health, and obviously these are very complex issues. They're very multivariate. There are lots of different things going on. There's social media. There's, many other aspects. But I do think that at the end of the day, for real connection to happen, people have to come together in environments or in containers that allow for that. And, we spend a lot of time in urban environments. People spend time at conferences, at, all kinds of different things. But it seems like those environments are not conducive to the kinds of like long-term relationships and friendships and romantic partnerships, etc., that are really meaningful in our lives. So I'm very interested in how we can experiment with creating spaces for that. So a couple of things we've noticed. One is that because of the variety of experience that is on offer, you can, in a relatively short amount of time, in a week or two, you can have many different types of experiences with people, like going on a hike together. Then you might see them in the sauna, you might see a talk that they do, you might be in a working group hacking on something for a hackathon. And all of that is possible within a pretty short amount of time. So the number of social ties that get made, and you kind of see people in different contexts, you see different parts of their personality, you start to really form very quick bonds that I don't think are, I think they're much more meaningful than just seeing the same friend for the same coffee once a month for, 6 months in a row, and you kind of end up having the same conversation because you're just in the exact same context. So something we've seen is that people bond extremely quickly, and then those relationships end up being quite strong and quite formative, and then they end up, traveling together as friend groups, or obviously there are romantic relationships that form. And then on the kids side, so this is, we've been around for about just over 2 years, right? So we're really learning a lot. We're kind of seeing where everything's happening, it's emerging, and we're almost like anthropologists kind of watching it occur. And one thing I've seen is people come who might be in, partnerships, and they might be folks who, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm in my early 30s. I probably in a prior time would already have kids by now, or would definitely be thinking about it. Now it's just more and more possible to extend that timeline, So there might be people like me who are, at that period of life thinking like, oh, maybe I don't want to have kids. It seems like a lot of effort. You become so isolated because children in society are just completely removed from like anything else going on. And so being a parent can be quite isolating. And then they come to Edge and there's all these kids running around and the parents are able to engage in, the sessions and give talks and meet cool people and make friends, and their kids are making friends. And people have literally told us like, oh, this has completely changed our minds. Like this has either rolled back the timeline so we feel like we can have kids much sooner, or actually just people have decided to have children. And now it's amazing because some of those early visitors who have made those decisions, we now get to see the kids grow up.
That is incredible.
Yeah. There's one boy called Maxwell that has been, I think, to most of our events, and he's now probably 3 years old. And so I've seen this being go from a baby to like an actual kind of walking, talking human. And I look forward to that continuing, these things can become really like multiple decade projects and real like villages that form. And so you kind of meet these people for life.
What's so cool about what you're doing is I think a lot of folks, including myself, are thinking a lot about innovation and pushing the needle on connection. And you're seeing it live with people in these experimental society incubators. What is something surprising that you've observed that maybe you wouldn't have expected like 3 years ago to see?
Great question. I think this is a little bit more on the actual, more on the kind of work and innovation side of things. But something I'm really encouraged by is that I was a little worried that when we first started doing these events, the concern is that you could just kind of revert back to the mean, and this would become almost like an extended vacation/conference for people, and it would be much more about like passive consumption of content, then you kind of feel good and you go home and you feel like, oh, maybe I learned something, but nothing really happens out of it. So I've been really pleasantly surprised by how, creation focused we've been able to make it. So really getting people into the mindset of coming to this place with a goal of actually producing something or creating something or having something to show for it, And what's cool, something we've realized is that there's a loop between kind of having an idea, creating it, and then getting feedback on it. So it's like ideation, creation, and iteration. And we're able to like really compress that and make it super tight where it can happen in the matter of a few days, not over months, right? So I'll give you an example. There were two people who met on the plane to Patagonia to our last event. And one was an engineer and the other one had this idea that she had wanted to build for a very long time. And they literally just started chatting. They both came from Berlin. And in the course of a couple of weeks, they were able to build a prototype and then actually demo it at our Sunday demo days, which is kind of a tradition, a ritual almost that we've instantiated in the community, which is always a ton of fun. And then we're starting to get users and start to get feedback on
Wow,
it. And
that's cool.
I've seen this time and time again where someone comes with this thing and they're like, I've wanted to build this for so long. Another example is Avery Krieger. He'd been a Stanford PhD in neuroscience, had this idea for ages to build kind of a longitudinal data set of like neural brainwaves in order to build a foundation model. And then he came to Edge Esmeralda last year, put neural caps on a bunch of people who are all really excited to get their brain measured, and then raised his round like at the Village, and now just raised $10 million a couple of weeks ago to scale, and that was 8 months in now. So this just keeps happening where people come in with this dream that they've had, and then their timelines just get really like brought forward because they're like, oh, I could just do this now because I'm surrounded by people that are doing cool things now. What's really cool about this moment in time about what we're building is that there's a lot of opportunity in different directions that we can go, and that's both wonderful to have that optionality, but also difficult to actually make decisions around what we should do. And a couple of the directions that we've seen emerge are one on what I've been talking about with actual, the startups that are coming out of the Village and out of the network more broadly, and folks that see the value in having this community of early supporters and users for whatever they're building. So obviously the traditional way to do it would be to raise a fund and then allocate capital into those early stage projects and get upside from that. That's interesting on like a long-term horizon in terms of achieving sustainability because the events are organized through a nonprofit, so we don't ever really want to be an events company, and so we've done that on purpose. Plus we allocate a lot of grants to support early stage science and technology and culture research. So the point there is, if we want this to be a multi-decade long thing, we need to find sustainable models of keeping that going. And obviously a tried and true method is making good early stage bets in startups that can go on to become, big companies. So that's one direction. So the second big bucket that we're interested in is built environment, or I guess you could call it real estate. Real estate is interesting because it's a very tried and true model. There are very, standardized processes and ways of doing things. It's, the business model works. And if you're able to make a place interesting and create value in that place, you can use the potential of the future value in the rise of the real estate to actually fund, artists or the school teachers that will make the place valuable, or the kinds of things that you want to see more of in a new town or a new city or existing neighborhoods as well. So we're very interested in how do we use this network of people who are building interesting things. They're interesting people. They are interested in going to new places, and actually use that to potentially uplift either, novel places or like existing places, like the town that we were in Patagonia, San Martin de los Andes. They were so excited to have our community come. They actually, after our first call, they were calling us back, which is very rare. They were the ones being very proactive about what we
really
wanted
cool.
to do. Yeah, it was so sweet. And they gave us the co-working space for free because they had this community of builders there who they wanted to be interacting with a global network of like the builders and investors and people who are coming from our community. A couple of the local builders actually got funding from some Silicon Valley VCs that came and they met.
So cool.
Yeah, from the local demo days. So the point is, there is a lot of potential value in creating these local and global partnerships, and maybe there is some way that we can, create models that are kind of beneficial for everyone involved. So that's something we're thinking about as well. I think of the villages almost as like incubators of affinity and kinship. So people come, they meet, they start to really, vibe and connect, and then they form meaningful connections. And because it happens within the context of Edge City, they also form kind of a feeling of affinity with Edge as a concept. And so the third thing that I'm thinking about is, I think you could loosely think of it as, some people call it a network state, some people call it a network society or network city, network nation. There's a lot of semantic drift in these things. And for some people, they mean very important differences. And for others, they don't care at all. But the point is, roughly, could you imagine communities that start to develop an identity and develop almost like a sense of shared purpose and shared values that people start to feel identity and belonging to, that could potentially even supersede the traditional themes or areas of identity and belonging that we grow up with? So, I told you a bit about my background. I've spent essentially a decade in Russia, UK, US, and now, I'm halfway through a decade in Europe. And that's obviously an extremely lucky and privileged thing to experience, but it also has left me with kind of a lack of a sense of nationalism in any particular direction. And I think that, national identity can be a really interesting and cool thing when it comes to culture and, maybe in sport or whatever, but it also has been the source of a lot of harm and ill. And I think it would be interesting if we move into a kind of a phase where people can choose what to identify themselves with themselves and have freedom to do that, versus just kind of be like imbued with a certain identity from the beginning. And it's like, you are American or you are Russian and therefore you can't like the other side and whatever, And so I'm interested in the possibility of the creation of almost new types of political entities or collective action entities that cross-sect national boundaries. And so it can have people from the US and from China and from Europe and from, the global South, who all feel part of some cohesive unit, and then over time actually gain the ability to have, collective action, and over time potentially even be recognized as entities by traditional sources of global power. So that, I think, is much more of a longer term thing, but I think we're starting to see semblances of it in certain cases. And I think that will be a very interesting development, especially if there are these kind of hubs around the world where these communities can come together and start to even, like we sometimes call Edge City a network city, where you could imagine, instead of being a contiguous city, that it's instead made up of neighborhoods that happen all over the world, some temporary, some permanent, or some that become permanent, that you can kind of move between, and there's shared values, shared identities, shared, norms, culture, rituals, etc.
So as you all think about creating these high trust containers, also of affinity and kinship, how do you all think about guardrails and like communities that feel safe, and basically, creating containers where folks can be very vulnerable and also feel very safe in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is definitely something we're thinking through live, and I'd actually be curious to get your takes on communities where you felt that, or maybe felt a lack of that and wanted something else. We've kind of had to learn as we go, and we're lucky to have people that have lots of experience in Burning Man or in various other communities, but kind of community care, community like developing a care culture, like my friend Toby Shoren calls it, is extremely important. And it's something that can't just be top down of like, it can't just be us as the organizers, or we generally tend to try to kind of be more in the background, because we don't want this to be like a cult of personality. So we're not very like top-down rulers, but it also can't just be us getting involved in every single bit of conflict or etc. But conflict does obviously arise. It arises in every single group of people, every configuration, and so you have to have ways of dealing with that. You can't just like brush it under the rug. So we've developed systems of having the community be more involved in things that come up, mediation, having people discuss what happened. There's so many good frameworks for this. There's NVC, nonviolent communication. These are like very well-trodden paths, and I think are incredibly important. I think if I had to rate ourselves, we probably have not, early on, we were not thinking about this enough. And over time, as things come up, you kind of just have to figure it out. You have to be like, okay, yes, this is a problem that we need to solve. Let's approach it with an engineering mindset. Like, who else has done this before? Like, lots of community builders are extremely adept at this. Let's learn from them. Let's bring them in to consult, etc. And I think that generally creates, hopefully, a nice feeling. I also think that I've seen this time and time again, but like events and communities really are reflections of the people that spend the most time thinking about them and creating them. And so I hope that, Janine and I as initiators, or the people that we've built around us, are kind of good stewards of the vibe, for lack of a better word, and yeah, and we obviously have like a lot to improve there, but I think we're on hopefully like a good track.
Yeah, I mean, Patagonia felt great to me.
Yeah.
And humans are complex.
Yeah,
like as an engineer, often the linearity of building systems can be much simpler than the complexity of like coalescing humans.
Oh my goodness, yeah, 100%. I mean, I think one thing that should not have been surprising, but it's just something I've had to keep learning, is that for all of our talk of wanting to kind of prefigure a better version of society, or demonstrate what it can be like to live in better ways, etc., it's like ultimately Edge is just a little microcosm of society, and that means things come up, like problems happen, people say dumb stuff and then have to deal with the consequences. And yeah, so I think we have the benefit of having the events be, although they are long, they are temporary. And so it does give us a bit of grace in having to figure certain things out, where like, if it was permanent, you really have to be super thoughtful about how you create structures, and like what happens if someone enters and is actually difficult for the entire thing, etc. And I've seen this happen in other permanent communities. What's cool about our kind of bootstrapping years, or the early years, is that we get to try a lot of interesting things at the month-longs, and then they end. And so we can learn like what worked, what didn't, and then we can improve for the next one and the next one. And over time, as these things do become permanent, I think we'll have so many years of knowledge of what worked, what didn't, and how we can kind of create something really cool.
Yeah, you guys have a reset button, which is cool, like how to build with the reset button so you can experiment.
Yeah.
I also feel like society has become way less forgiving over the past decade of these like social mistakes and faux pas.
Yeah.
And the important thing that I try to remember is, if I'm trying to do something new or put myself out there, I'm gonna mess it up. And I have to have the forgiveness within myself, and hopefully on a community level, to be wrong and to say like, hey, sorry, I made a mistake and I learned from it. And I would love to continue to see more examples of that.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, I think, what to say? I think a reaction to the last decade or so of kind of cultural commentary and goings on has, like, on one side of things, people have just completely exited, and there's this kind of like libertarian side of the space that we're in that's very focused on exit, and it's just like, okay, we're just going to go off over there. It's going to be, we're going to bring all our favorite people, and we're just going to start a new society fresh, and goodbye. Thanks for all the fish. And for us, it's just like, that's less interesting, because I do care about current environments. I do care about the places where people currently live, and I want to be an agent of helping improve that and kind of incubating ideas that can be helpful there. But that's why I think, instead of completely shunning society, it's interesting to do these kind of micro exits where we do have to grapple with these issues of it's kind of hard to make mistakes sometimes. It's kind of hard, say something dumb on Twitter and then suddenly it could like completely change your, day, week, or potentially even like career. So we do have to grapple with these things, but we get to do it in this kind of container where, like we were saying, you can kind of try a bunch of different stuff, and then people can go back to where they're from and they can spread those ideas, they can learn from what happens, they can bring more ideas the next time, etc. So
have you noticed any differences with the energy the SF Silicon Valley crowd brings into maybe more of the international community?
it feels right now, I again would love your thoughts on this because you actually spent time here, but it feels like there is a sense that something is impending. There is like something looming, and people are very either animated by it or scared by it, but there is like an emotional, thing that's happening pretty much with everyone that I'm meeting here. And people are afraid of being like the permanent underclass, or they're just, mid AI psychosis. Like, I know what that's like, just like super locked into the agents that they're building. And they're just like, I don't want to talk about anything else. And so there's a little bit of that energy that, is very different to, for example, when I spend time in Berlin, where I live like most of the year. Berlin to me is kind of funnily like more of a futuristic place in some ways, because I think it's already like a post-AGI city where people's sources of meaning are completely divorced from what they do for work. And so, if ASI suddenly takes over and there's like, I don't know, some kind of universal basic compute or whatever, I think people would just like instantly switch into, like nothing would have to change there. It's already like, it's living in the future. People have their like art projects, their communities, their friendships, their experimental noise band or whatever. So yeah, in some ways I feel like it's a perfect example of what life can be like post scarcity. Obviously a lot has to go right for society to like get there. But I think this kind of like, this panic around like, where are people going to find meaning when AI takes their jobs? It's like, I think we'll be okay. I think there is a lot meaningful you can do in life that's not, work. And I think people have that perspective here because they're in the 25% of US jobs that have, I mean, this is like a David Graeber statistic. I don't know if this is accurate, but roughly like a fifth to a quarter of jobs in the US feel like they have agency over the work that they do and they get meaning out of it, and it's, etc. And obviously all the people building AI are in that, quartile. So people getting really like, oh, where are people going to find meaning? It's like, they'll be fine.
Right.
Like, don't worry.
The human elements of being alive.
Exactly. There is a lot that you could be doing. To get back to your question, I think that it's very energizing to be in environments that are more flavored in this like Bay Area energy, and I'm excited for Edge Esmeralda this year because things keep accelerating and keep heating up, so we'll definitely have more of that vibe. But I think it's important to have, like, I think one of the most important things that happens is that everyone that comes to Edge is coming to a new environment, right? At least all of the, the people that travel there, and obviously we have the local relationships as well, but for most of the attendees, they're coming to a new place, even if they have to leave and drive a couple of hours from where they live. And so there's kind of a window of opportunity where, because everyone's in a novel environment, they can try a new habit, they can try a new way of thinking, a new way of being, they can kind of be someone different. And that creates the opportunity to actually have new ideas and new, things that you might build. Like, people come to Edge Esmeralda and meet people that live in the same city as them, San Francisco, and they're like, how did we never meet, or wow, maybe they did meet, but because they meet in this new place where everyone's a bit different, they actually have a much easier time connecting because it's a container that allows for that. Whereas in SF, I mean, you were saying that can be quite difficult, Yeah, I'm curious for your perspective there too.
Yeah, I think I love what you said about stepping into a new place and assuming a new identity. And I obviously am a bit woo-woo, and I think so much comes to fruition in life that originates from your inner world, and that this ability to mentally step into a new identity is what creates the tailwinds, like in reality, for that to happen, and for that to happen often like faster than you expect it to. And so everyone, I think, has a different relationship with where they live. For me, there are really strong identity structures of being here in the Bay that often feels like I'm a little bit more on my guard, versus I really like the idea of like, okay, this is a new month-long experience. Decide what you want to step into and experiment with that here.
Yes, we could actually be way more thoughtful about that, because I think it happens naturally, but we can probably preempt it a bit, you know, and say like,
Yeah.
hey, this is actually a chance to try something new, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know about you if you had this experience, but when I went to university, I realized this later in my 20s when I was introspecting around this experience, but I completely reinvented myself without, not like on purpose, but I just became a different person. And I think kind of subconsciously was like, maybe let me try being this way or this way. And I was moving from London to New York, so it was already a different container. And I think I really loved the parts of me that became more alive in New York, because I became, I just became more American over my 10 years there. I was very, became much more open and optimistic and like, anything is possible and let's just go for it, you know? But yeah, in retrospect, that was like a real inflection point of like, whoa, I was a completely different person. I got to try a different side of myself because I was surrounded by brand new people. And I'm not saying everyone needs to like completely reinvent themselves all the time, but there is kind of an interesting opportunity there. And I think it's one that we should encourage people to take.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to ask too is if someone is watching this and they're feeling lonely or like devoid of community, or like they don't have the roots or deep relational ties they want to have at this point in their life, what advice would you give them from what you've seen on how to like phase shift, how to kind of leap into a reality that feels much more connected?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, I think, to preface, I'm not like a developmental psychologist or anything, but I have done, inner personal work, so I can reflect on my experience. I think a lot of this, first of all, starts internally. And so you have to, first of all, realize that this is something that maybe is missing or maybe something that you want. I think some people, it takes a while to realize like, I'm actually quite lonely, And this happened to me a few years ago when I first moved to Berlin. I was meeting people and I was having good experiences, but German people are amazing. They're just kind of hard to like really develop like deep friendships with, especially they all have friends from like way back in like kindergarten times. So after a bit, I was like, I think I'm actually lonely, even though I'm interacting with a lot of people, but I don't think I have the depth of relationship here that I had before. And then that kind of clicked for me, and I was like, this is something I have agency over. Like I can change that. I can talk about it with people. I can do things that will allow me to, move beyond that. So step one is just kind of realizing, and that takes some time. And then two, for me, I'm a big fan of just kind of like phase transitions or shifts or something. I'm like, okay, well, the current way of doing things isn't working necessarily, so let me just try something different. And I think moving your body to a new geographic location is like a very easy way of doing that. But I actually don't necessarily recommend the digital nomad thing of like, I'm just gonna go to Medellin or to Tokyo and like figure it out. Because, you get there and you realize like wherever you go, there you are, this kind of thing. It's like you're just in the same kind of context, and it's hard to like just land somewhere brand new and do something very different. So it's actually nice to kind of land into something like a community that's already there, for you to experience and to dive into. So obviously I'm talking my own book here, but I think just like come to Edge, you'll meet lots of interesting people. It's in a context where it's already easy to, like the barrier to saying hello to someone is non-existent,
Right.
because everyone's kind of new to it. Whereas if you're walking around, Paris or Berlin or London or New York, San Francisco, and you try and just like say hi to people, don't talk to me, leave me alone kind of thing.
Especially for men. I mean,
Yeah,
unfortunately, like it's a bit different, right?
100%, 100%. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that would be my suggestion. Yeah.
Is there anything that you think should be more in the culture or in the zeitgeist around this moment of like technological takeoff and connection and these human elements that you're seeing live in society's day to day?
Yeah. So one thing that has been very interesting is that I don't know if you're seeing this too on the timeline or in your conversations, but I get a lot of people reaching out to me because of the work that I do with ideas specifically around how to use AI or frontier technology in general, agents, etc., in order to help human connection, humans find meaning, a lot of mental health. It's like, how can we use these things to actually help people go deeper, reach different states of, jhana, meditation, etc., or actually connect with each other in community. And I think a lot of people naturally, we become kind of a beacon or like a bat signal for these kinds of things, because it's like, oh, there's 500 people all living in community in one place and they're all interested in like new ideas and frontier tech. Like, yeah, let me definitely go there and like see who wants to try out what I'm building. So I don't think those things are going to be, golden bullets that solve everything, but I am encouraged by it, especially the people that are very thoughtful and are not just trying to throw AI into everything, but actually thinking about, okay, what new design affordances do we have with this technology and how can we use it to connect people? So like, super basic example, at Edge Esmeralda this year, everyone's going to get an Edgeclaw. It's like a fork of openclaw essentially. Super basic agent that's going to allow you to do several things. You can ask it questions about the event, any information you need, wiki, calendar events, etc. Like obvious. It will also allow you to, in a privacy preserving way, give it information about what you want and like intentions you have, kinds of people you want to meet, things you're interested in recently, books you've read, and then it will go out and it will work with the other agents in the community to figure out, who should you have coffee with tomorrow, or maybe a small group that could actually work on an interesting project together, or go on a hike, or something that allows you to kind of turn up the dial on serendipity without just staring at your phone all the time, and allow you to be more present in these environments. And then the third thing is, I'm really interested, this is another zeitgeisty thing, of getting people more engaged in the governance of the things that that run their lives or that they're involved in. And I think for a lot of people, the idea of governance or being involved in democracy is like a once every 4 years kind of thing, and we almost have like an antagonistic relationship to it, because you're like, oh, I don't really like the choices I'm being given, but like, okay, there's the worst of, two evils and whatever. And I think that I'm very interested in ideas around higher bandwidth democracy, getting people more engaged in their communities, and it could be your local supermarket co-op. It could be the house that you live in. It could, or like, the co-op that you live in. It could be a group of people that are really interested in the same thing that are actually global, etc. And so what I want people to do when they come to Edge is actually engage in that practice and use these agents as kind of a intermediary that takes the amount of time that it would normally take to, come to a decision as a community, from requiring 30 minutes from everyone to just requiring 30 seconds, just like quick summaries. Here's what we're thinking. What do you reckon? That kind of thing. And I hope that people will come to Edge, have that experience, then go back to where they live and be like, oh, this is actually a really trivial open source tech stack. I can just spin it up for my neighborhood, and suddenly we have neighborhood block parties, or we have like barbecues that people are hosting and that kind of thing. So that's what I'm hoping for, maybe it's naive, but I think it's worth trying.
I know, I think Edgeclaw sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I love the integration of agents to push you out of your phone and device and into like presence and eye contact. What is the most experimental frontier tech you've seen coming out of these Edge programs? So for example, I was in Patagonia and we did 2 hours of breath work every day. And I had not gone deep into breath work. I think the science is a little bit ambivalent around it, but I saw people having huge emotional experiences through that exploration. So for me, that was very frontier.
Yeah, breathwork is interesting because it's everywhere now, and you can really, it's like different. Breathwork is everywhere, and you can have very different like level of experience with it. And we brought specifically a guy called Paul Kuhn, who is extremely good at facilitating these things. And was leading these things in Patagonia that had, you know, like 2-hour experiences, but they also combine, you know, it's a good amount of woo, but it's a good amount of like technology. And yeah, so I think that kind of thing is very interesting. It's also very in the lineage of, you know, old school Bay Area, you know, from the 60s. So yeah, I like that kind of stuff. What's the most frontier thing? So there is a concept called Vasocomputation, and it's there are a few folks working on it, but the person we know best is Mike Johnson, who has been developing this theory for a long time. And in summary, it's essentially the concept that our vascular system actually contains a lot of, let's say, intelligence, and has the ability to essentially compute. And the way this works is that tiny smooth muscle, tiny bits of smooth muscle around the vasculature can actually tighten and release based on certain stimuli. And there are times when it can actually tighten and then fully latch and not let go. And the theory is that potentially this is of trauma or just general kind of body intelligence. And so this is an idea that we've been helping to develop. I mean, this is kind of like fundamental foundational philosophy and science, and there are experiments that have to happen that we're now helping run, which is really interesting to see if we can find these latches. What happens if we are able to unlatch those latches, you know, things like that. Can we actually help, you know, run experiments and do research that could lead to breakthroughs, that could lead to just like happier, healthier, more flourishing humans? So those are the kinds of things that we're very interested in. Obviously, this is very, I don't know, frontier or kind of out there, but many things that are pretty standard now that we take for granted started out as seeming completely wild and insane. So yeah, I'm interested in things like that, and kind of being a place where people can come with ideas that seem kind of crazy, and then they get tested out, they get discussed, they get debated, pushed back on, you know, iterated on, and then can actually potentially become something in the world. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love doing that within community.
Yeah.
And the like social layer on top of bouncing moonshots off of each
Yeah.
other
Yeah,
with
yeah.
a culture that is really encouraging of moonshots. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about yourself, about Edge, maybe about that like frontier tech and society intersection that I should ask you?
One thing I've been thinking about is an idea of
We're out in public. We're doing it live. This is like as unedited as it gets.
Yeah, amazing. Something I'm interested in is kind of how movements form and how they grow and then fade away. And it's interesting to me because I feel that, you know, just taking a couple of examples, for example, like Occupy Wall Street or Arab Spring or these kind of, you know, mid-aughts movements that were using platforms like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to grow really quickly. But then the platforms that they used were not designed, they're designed for engagement and virality, but they're not designed for actually like deliberation or coming to collective decisions. And so, Occupy was being run through a mix of like Facebook groups and things like this, just not the infrastructure that you want to actually decide anything. And obviously, there's a lot going on there with these movements, and they're extremely complex and interesting, like emergent phenomena. But one thing I'm interested in is, what would it look like to actually create digital spaces where things could not only gain that level of traction that fast, but then also harness that energy to actually come to like collective deliberation processes, and therefore come to good decisions together. And I think we're now at a point, I think we've kind of crossed the chasm in terms of technical ability or technological tooling that will allow for something like that. I think now with AI assisted deliberation, there's a lot you can do in terms of finding clusters of opinion, doing this like extremely quickly and being able to actually be quite decisive and quite, like move quite quickly in a way that normally is quite difficult in like community decision-making settings. So I'm very interested in what I think over the next few years we're going to start to see almost like a new type of collective or political entity that oh, hello. That
This
will
is, by the way, this is a, I don't know if it's like a spiritual practice, but
Oh.
she wasn't being rude. People will
No,
walk this
not
like
at all. Yeah,
end
yeah.
to end to stay
Cool.
totally on the logs, which we
That's
can do
so
after.
cool. I would love
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we
I
can
would
do it.
definitely love that. So I'm very curious about how these new types of things will form. And I think we're about to see a lot of movements that, again, are global in nature, that transcend national boundaries, where people feel drawn to the values or the mission of that thing, maybe even drawn to whoever is leading it. And we now have all of the tools we need to gather and allocate resources. So you can have shared treasuries, you can have, crypto on the back end that's completely obfuscated. No one even has to worry about creating a wallet or whatever, but you don't have to set up a bank account in every country where people live. You just have it be global. You have deliberation tools, governance tools to decide what happens with that treasury, who are the people that you put into positions of decision-making power, etc. How do you delegate decision, control? What is it? We have the IRL infrastructure now for these communities to actually gather for extended periods of time, pop-up villages, Edge City. So there is everything is there, Oh, also all the progress we've made in cryptography allows all of this stuff to happen in a privacy preserving way, so that people who live in, countries where there's like an antagonistic relationship to their government can still participate in ways. They can actually, use zero knowledge proofs in order to participate in, referendums against the people in power. This happened in a couple years ago using something called Raramo in Russia. They actually used a tool that allowed Russians to scan their passport and cryptographically prove that they are a Russian citizen and have a referendum on Putin, but it didn't reveal anything about who they actually were. So there's all these cool things that we can do now that I think just require a bit of thought and a bit of like agency and leadership for people to go for it. Like any set of technologies or ideas, these are double-edged swords. I think they could be used for harm or for good. I'm very interested in, the latter and seeing what kind of emerges out of that. So yeah, that's like a big, interesting set of ideas that I'm curious about.
Well, this has been so fascinating. Can you give us one more invitation to Edge City?
Yes, yeah. So I encourage folks to attend one of our 2 flagships this year. The first will be in California. It's called Edge Esmeralda. It will happen essentially the whole month of June, from May 30th to June 27th. We have themed weeks, so you can come at a topic that is interesting or exciting to you, but really any time during the month that you can make it, you'll have a really interesting, dynamic, cool time. And come with an idea, something you want to build. You know, we're going to be giving everyone AI agents, so you can get ramped up on that. And it's a really cool chance to like make friends, stay at the frontier of what's happening, actually connect in community, and, you know, raise around if you want to, if that's something that you're interested in, or just
Or
advance.
fall in love.
Or fall in love.
You
yeah,
know,
exactly.
there's, a lot
that's
of
way more
intimacy
important.
happening.
Yeah, that's way more important. So yeah, and then the second one will be Edge City, India. That will happen in October, and we'll share details about that on our X or on our Substack. So yeah, follow along.
Thank you so much, Timour.
Thank
This
you,
was
Ash.
such an
Yeah.
awesome conversation. And I have done Edge, I've done Esmeralda, I did Patagonia. I am such a fan of what you're building. Anyone that knows me knows I think a lot about the intersection of connection and frontier tech. And I think Timour and team are so unique in that they are living it. They're seeing it around them. I mean, they've had co-founders and couples and kids like emerge from their programming. So if you at all are interested in this, it is very special, kind of the containers that they've set up. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.